A selection of experiences of the late Master Dowser, Peter Golding, extracted from his autobiographical book, Experiences of an Old Dowser. The gift of healing. Since my days as an engineer, I've done a lot of dowsing for health and healing. I hadn't tried and didn't know that I could do this healing thing until about 25 years ago. My wife had a pain in the lower abdomen somewhere. She had had the pain for 6 months. It was excruciating, and she had been to the doctor many times, and he would just give her some tablets or tell her there was nothing to worry about and send her away. However, one Friday night, still suffering pains, she said, "I've booked an appointment with my doctor on Monday, and I am not going to leave his surgery until he has arranged for an X-ray. I am determined." Later that Friday night she said, "Oh Peter, it's terrible, what's wrong with me?" What's wrong? She expected me to douse to find out, absolutely confident that I could do something. She was eyeing on the bed, and I thought, well, what do I do? I stood alongside her with my dowsing rods over her body and scanned along from head to toe, and when I got to a certain point over the lower abdomen the rods crossed. I thought, oh well, perhaps it is somewhere along this line here, but whereabouts? So I did the same thing along this line from right to left until the rods crossed again. So it was somewhere round about here, but how far in is it? How do I find the distance in? The old bishop's rule we use in water divining came to mind: the distance out is the distance in. So I touched the skin with the rods and then moved them away from the body until they crossed. "It's this far in," I said. "What have you got in there?" She said, "You tell me." I said, "Look, you're the biologist, you teach biology, you know absolutely far more than I do." And she said, "Okay, there is the digestive system." I said, "No, I'm getting a no for that." She said, "Okay, is it the urinary system?" I said, "No, it isn't." "I'm not." "Yes." Eventually she mentioned the ovary. Well, what's wrong with it? So I said, well, you give me the words and I will tell you the answers. And she went through this, that and the other. No, yes. It was a cyst on the ovary. Now I didn't know what a cyst on the ovary really was, but this is what she asked, and my rods gave me a yes. And she said, with great faith, "Peter, you can do something about it. Do something about it, please. You can do something." I thought, right, there's confidence there. Not a skeptic at all. You can do something. She said again. So what did I do? I just knelt down at the bed and I concentrated over this point, just concentrated, and the rods crossed. And I could feel the energy draining from me, I could feel it, and then eventually the rods went back to the balanced, neutral position. I said, I don't know what I have done, but I have done something. I could feel it had been draining from me. Nowadays. Know, of course, that we should bring the energy in through us to that point, rather than from us. The next morning she got up and she said, I have no pain. I've got no pain. It was the same on the Sunday morning, and on the Monday as well. But she still went to see the doctor and she said, you know, I have had this pain for the past 6 months and I was determined that you'd send me for an X-ray, but my husband did this dowsing over me, and it's all gone now. And of course he said, oh well, it was just psychosomatic then. My wife and I knew otherwise. A problem in finding water pipes. A client in Worcestershire once asked me to trace the route of a network of blue PVC water pipes over his farm. So I went to where he thought they started and got a positive reaction. I then followed my dowsing rods, which took me along the route he thought his pipes had taken. We were both pleased that my dowsing was agreeing with his expectation of the route. The direction seemed quite logical. I spent about 2 hours there, walking over the fields to numerous water troughs and putting down. Horrified and amazed that dowsing be used to locate pipes so accurately. A few days later he phoned me to tell me he had dug quite deep holes with his JCB over some of the routes I had marked, but had found no sign of the water pipes. I could hardly believe it, especially as I had been getting a very positive reaction along the logical route. I felt awful about this and apologized profusely and returned the full amount, including my travel expenses. I tried to learn something from this unhappy experience. Where had I gone wrong? The dowsing reactions felt so positive. On reflection, I probably had preconceived ideas in my head and my dowsing reactions were quite happy to confirm them. As a result of that experience, I'm now reluctant to take on any water pipe jobs unless I can be assured that my starting point is over the pipe, or if I can see where the pipe descends into the ground, or I can see it when lifting an inspection cover. This would then confirm I am over the pipe, so all I have to do is follow my dowsing reactions as the rods point ahead and follow the route. Map dowsing for water in France. About 10 years ago a neighbour of mine in Slimbridge village asked me if I could help him find water for a friend of his who had a house in France. I said it would be too expensive for me to travel out there, but if he could send me a sketch of his home and grounds, I would try to help by map dowsing. The map arrived a few days later, so I dowsed and made a mark on it where I predicted how much water would be found and at what depth. I handed it back to the man and heard no more about it. About 5 years later, he happened to see me in the village and said, "Peter, the people in France are calling you that magician of Slimbridge." He said he had shown the sketch. He said he had shown the sketch with my mark to his friend who took one look at the spot I had marked and said that's no good because they had already drilled there and found nothing. But then he looked at the depth I had predicted water would be found. So they drilled again, but deeper, to my predicted depth, and found copious amounts of water. He often refers to my magic wands when talking about dowsing. Remote healing, distance no problem. I visited a client of mine in Bedfordshire who wanted me to find water. The dowsing and subsequent drilling were satisfactory and he got a good supply of water. At the end of my water divining, as we dowsers often do, we talked about the various things that we dowsers often do. We talked about the various things that dowsing can do in addition to finding water. I mentioned health and healing. His wife was standing alongside and I said, "Yes, with my pendulum I can scan down your body and tell you where you have a problem." She jumped at the chance. As I scanned down, the pendulum reacted. I said, "Actually, you do have a problem, just here." She said, "Gosh, yes I do. That's amazing." I did some healing for her, but I said the person doesn't necessarily have to be with me. I said, as long as I have a photograph and their name I can do it remotely. It doesn't matter where they are. My client said, "What about Australia?" I said, "Yes, I can do it from here to Australia if you like." He said, "Well, we have a niece in Australia and for the last 6 months she has not been able to go to work because of being cramped up with arthritis or something, like an old woman. She was always so jolly, out dancing, laughing, listening to light music, and really enjoying life, had a boyfriend and everything, but she has given up going out with her boyfriend, she's not going out to work, she was walking around all cramped up like an old woman. She was only about 21. I said, "Yes, I probably could really help that girl. As long as I have her photograph, her name and permission, then I could do it." "You must always get permission." He said that getting her permission was a little bit awkward because she was a very religious girl and she may not take kindly to somebody doing hocus pocus and that sort of thing. There are a lot of people who think that dowsing is some sort of witchcraft or the work of the devil, but it is not. Quite the reverse, I regard it as something from higher authority. I asked if her mother would give permission. "Oh yes, definitely." So I said I would do this on her mother's authority and asked him to send me the girl's photograph. I received it 2 days later via email. It was a lovely photograph of this cheerful young girl. So, with her name and her photograph, I concentrated my mind on her and conducted a short scan. Of course, she was not aware that I was doing this. The pendulum reacted at one point and I went through my checklist of possible systems and got a reaction for an endocrine system problem. I'm not a doctor, I don't know the anatomy all that well, but this doesn't matter as I use checklists. The main thing is, let's clear it. So irrespective of what it was, I said, please bring Charlene to radiant health. Please let that healing energy go to where it is most required and bring this person to radiant health. In other words, I am not deciding where it goes. It is left to a higher authority. My pendulum rotated vigorously, indicating to me that energy was being transferred to her, and I waited until it came to rest. And that was it. I could tell then that the job was done. 2 days later my client in Bedfordshire phoned me. He said, "Peter, I don't quite know how to explain this. This is strange. She was in bed at night, because it was night time with her and daytime with me, and she said she felt this warm glow around her face, and she saw an angel at her side, and there was another angel at the foot of the bed. When she got up in the morning she was upright and bright again. She was cheerful, and she had completely changed back to her normal self. I remember receiving a letter from her mother and you could almost read the tears of joy. She said, 'Thank you, Peter, I've got my Charlene back again. She's back at work, she's singing, she's dancing, she's out with her boyfriend and they are arranging their wedding.' Oh, she was so thrilled and very grateful. Since then I've heard that they are married. It's lovely and rewarding to get feedback like that. It bolsters your confidence and ability for the next job. So it doesn't matter how far away, distance is no object. You can do this in any part of the world. Didn't protect myself at Tumpy Green. Now for something one has to be very careful about when dowsing. One morning, members of our Slimbridge dowsing group had gone to the home of the very friendly Brigadier Stephen Goodall at Tumpy Green in our parish for an exercise in archaeological dowsing. He was then chairman of the Slimbridge Local History Society and was quite agreeable to us wandering all over the place with our dowsing rods, and was anxious to hear what we had discovered about its history. The house was very old and had been larger at one time in its life, with parts of it having many changes of use. We found the outline of how extensive it had been before parts had been demolished many years ago. It seemed to have been self-sufficient, having its own dairy, bakery, stables, water supply, and everything else. We also discovered, by dowsing, what appeared to have been a monastery or nunnery or some such religious building many years ago in what was now the garden. We checked for any ley lines and other energy lines and found that one of them was in line with the parish church and even extended to Gloucester Cathedral. I was demonstrating how to locate and follow these lines with my dowsing rods when the line I was following started to rotate into a spiral. The others were watching me go round in circles and noticed that my face had turned ashen white. They shouted, "Peter! Come away from there," and they dragged me away and sat me down to recover. I felt terrible and my energy seemed to have drained away from me. Any longer at that spot and I felt I would have died. Foolishly, I had not protected myself before I started dowsing. I have always stressed the importance of putting an imaginary protective shield around yourself before dowsing, and on this occasion I didn't do it myself. You are opening and exposing your mind to information coming in. You need this information for your normal dowsing reactions to decipher and respond with answers. However, you are also exposed to evil and harmful energies unless you put this defensive shield around you to fight off anything that could harm you. I tend to envisage a purple flame transmuting any evil energy to good energy. I also wipe my hands around my body as though I am covering it with protection, but on this occasion I had not done so. We later discovered that the spot had been a mortuary or some such place. A more likely answer was that it was where many people had been buried in a mass grave after they had died during the Plague or Black Death during the Middle Ages. This mishap of mine served as a very good lesson to everyone, and I have noticed nowadays that they always go through the motions and ask if they are protected before they start any dowsing activity, especially when archaeological dowsing or dealing with energy lines, geopathic stress or similar entities. Locating a long-lost castle. I was asked by the local mayor of Dursley, the town nearest to us, Gloucestershire, if I could find out where there was a castle, because there's a castle street, but no sign of a castle. So, where was it, or where had it been? There were conflicting views from some people who thought they knew where it might have been. So I said, yes, okay, I'll have a look. I got the local map out, and by map dowsing, you all know about map dowsing, I'm sure, I asked to be shown where the castle had been. As a result, I got a dowsing reaction for the castle on top of a hill, where there was a clump of trees. I went up there to dowse on site, and sure enough, yes, I got a dowsing reaction indicating a castle had been there. So I went back and told him that the castle was up on top of the hill. And he said, oh no, not that one, no, that's not the one we're looking for. That was an older one. Iron Age or something, I can't remember. He said, no, there was one here in the town somewhere, and it was still standing in the 15th century. I said, okay, now I know what I'm looking for, I'll have another look. So I did the same again with my map dowsing at home, but asking for a castle of that date. I was soon getting a reaction over the present recreation field. So I went down there and took the steps leading up from the car park to the recreation ground gate, and I was checking with my dowsing rods all the time. Yes, I was getting a reaction saying it was up there in the recreation field. Of course there was nothing to see, and I asked, are there any remains of the foundations? And my rod swung across me, not towards the recreation field but to my left where there was an existing building, the tabernacle. What must have happened, and a lot of people had suspected this, they must have used this tufaceous stone from the castle ruins as a foundation for the new tabernacle that was built in the early 19th century. That was good, I thought. Anyway, then I got out onto the recreation field and began looking for this castle. I was finding all sorts of features, the walls, where the windows were, the moat, that sort of thing. At that time there was an architect, John Wilkes, who had been writing almost every week in the Dursley Gazette about where he thought this castle had been, and he was convinced that it was on the recreation ground. He had even drawn sketches of what he thought it would have looked like, but nobody would believe him. I had his telephone number, so I phoned him and asked, would you be interested in coming down here, John? I'm finding the outline and other features of the castle here on the recreation ground. He came hotfoot down to the field, and he was able to ask the questions I couldn't because he knew about architecture, ancient buildings, and whatnot. My university degree is in electronic systems, and not all that useful for these things. He was taking notes of what my dowsing was locating. What was the thickness of this wall, he asked, and said, oh, that can't be right. I'm getting 4 feet wide. He said, yes, that's quite all right, really. He said they would have been filled in with stone, quite normal. I said, okay, there's a moat around here, and he made more notes. Then I said, oh, down here there's a cellar or kitchen, below ground level. Hang on though, there was a moat here and there's a cellar down here. How is this? Aren't they going to get wet? He asked, what's the height of the window? I wouldn't have thought to ask such a question, but I dowsed again and I said, oh, it's 7 feet high. So the window was up above the water level. That was reassuring. Even such details as how many floors there were, 3 stories, that sort of thing. I then walked along to where I detected the entrance and followed the direction of my dowsing rod along the wall into the castle. Then it went to the right and sent me into a spiral. I followed the direction of my rods and went round 3.5 times before it stopped. I must have been going up a spiral staircase, up to the next level, and I could do the same with the next one and so on. Fascinating. Back at the entrance I asked for the width. Then, by dowsing, I located the start at one side and the finish at the other. John asked for the height of the entrance and I said, it's about 8 feet near the hinges, but you have got about 10 feet or more here in the center. The arched double doors had been wooden, 3.5 inches thick. He said, yes, that would be right. A horse-drawn carriage could get through. You would have a portcullis there as well. Watching my rods, I said, no. I was getting no reaction for a portcullis. Oh, no portcullis. He made a note. I said, you have the drawbridge here, over the moat. He said, yes, there would have been 2 of those, one on this side and one on the other. No, I said, there was only one. He was making notes of all this. There had been a central courtyard open to the sky. I found other features such as where the fireplace was in a certain room, and so on. This was fascinating for him because it was all lining up with what he knew about ancient buildings. However, when this discovery was publicized locally, some people still weren't convinced. I couldn't believe it. I'm a dowser and was convinced my predictions were correct, but they wouldn't accept it. So I got hold of a team of geophysical surveyors and they came out with their resistivity test equipment. I had marked out where the outline of the castle was and the moat around the outside, and they came along with their geophys equipment and they put 3 parallel lines of resistivity sensors in one direction and one at right angles in the other, extending across my outline of the castle. They conducted the resistivity tests, which checked the resistance of the ground down below the sensors, placed at 1 meter apart. If there is stone below ground, the resistance is higher than when it is just moist soil. So they could see all the high resistance points, which indicated that there was some stonework below us. When I had a look at the printout, sure enough, when they came to the points I had marked the outline of the outer walls, there was a higher resistance. Also in the middle there was a mass of something, obviously lots of rubble left behind when the castle was demolished. They hadn't taken everything away. So I was convinced. Some still weren't all that sure, but they were now keeping quiet about it. Later John Wilkes showed me a copy of a painting of the tabernacle dated 1810, which was probably painted soon after it was built. The road was gravel, not what we have today, and there were horses and pedestrians on the road. The artist had drawn fairly accurately everything that could be seen. There were people standing outside the tabernacle, as though they had just come out of a service. It showed other buildings in existence at that time. Then I looked at the left edge of the picture and I could see the remains of a building with an arched entrance with doors, the exact shape of the castle entrance with doors I had described when dowsing. And there was also a triangular ironwork frame on the front of it, which would have been used for the drawbridge. And I said, that's the entrance to the castle. That's exactly where I had shown it during my dowsing. Further proof, if any was needed. The end.